What's up, guys? Welcome to Conspiracy and the Cross. I'm Moon, your co-host.
And I'm Bryan of Demonerasers, the other co-host. And today we're going to be talking about Tartaria Empire. We're going to get into some crazy details and some interesting things and facts that you may not necessarily know, and a lot of stuff like what is the Tartarian Empire exactly, and where did it come from, what's this idea altogether, and like this hidden sort of thing that we see on a lot of maps, old maps. If you guys don't know, there's a lot of old maps that say Tartaria, Tartary, Tartarus. These terms all are connected. We're going to start talking about that today.
Yeah, it blows my mind to think that they would not. It makes sense they wouldn't, but it blows my mind to think that there is a whole millions and billions of people who have never even heard of the term Tartaria. It was so recent in our past, and the fact that nobody knows, it shows that there's something very, very specific in that period that really has to do with everything as far as the world is right now.
Yeah, they're definitely hiding something. It seems like with Tartaria, it's very unusual, the type of stuff that has been removed and erased from our history, guys. Like, a lot of people think that the history books that they taught you in school were all 100% right, and that's exactly how things went. That's not how it went at all. It's very obvious when you start reading some old books and when you start looking through some old texts and old maps, you realize very quickly, like, wait a second, I don't know if what they're telling us about Christopher Columbus is true, even. Like, let alone the things beyond that. Like, there's a point of semi-truths up to a certain point that have been skewed, because the truth is, guys, the victors write history. So what makes you think that the history you've been told is even correct? We see it right now. We see history being rewritten. And that's today's standard with all the things. Then they're still erasing history and rewriting it the way they want it to sound or appear. Just think how much more they've been doing that in the past.
Yeah, I mean, even recently, they just changed the definition of recession, and it's just a small thing.
Yeah.
They add up as we go. So I guess the first thing about Tartaria is the buildings, the freaking buildings, that solid marble buildings, like 1,000-foot tall, 2 stories underground. We have all these designs that we'll put up on screens in these cathedrals and these buildings. We have these just grand designs that, a lot of people will theorize that they work with vibrations to make them, and that they also hold the vibrations, and they use it for many things along with radium and all these different things. So it's, how are they building horses and carriages, right? How are they building such massive buildings? Who was building them, and why was there no toilets and no kitchens in these buildings? What's going on, Bryan?
Dude, that's a very good question. And I love the fact that these are fantastically carved and designed buildings, and they are monumental in a lot of ways. But horse and buggy, guys, horse and buggy. They supposedly built these with horse and buggy. Okay, like transporting thousands and thousands of pounds of concretes and materials and minerals and rocks from quarries miles away to build these fantastic structures, and supposedly they did it with horses and buggies. It's laughable when you start to realize the amount of suggestive ideas that they gave that are like, oh, this is how we think they did this, and it's just. And then there's no explanation or understanding for the things that are buried underneath the ground. Like you also mentioned, the underground components of stuff, where it's like a lot of these buildings look like they've been destroyed or buried or intentionally buried or somehow sank under the ground. And a lot of the structures that we dig up today, there's even photos of the White House that you can actually dig up. They were excavating parts of the White House, and you can see underneath it the pillars and the stuff, and this architecture goes down deeper than what we see at the top of the White House right now today. And it's very interesting because it's well, why is it even like that? It's almost like, did we build that, or did we find it? Hence the term founding fathers, maybe. Since it was it's very unusual, a lot of the structures and a lot of the things out there. And again, the reason why a lot of this stuff, we can only speculate for the reasons for a lot of these things. This is a topic that there's so much to this topic I have yet to come across the finalized theory where I'm like, okay, that makes sense. You know, I've come across many different theories as to how these things have been built and why these things have been there. Many different theories. One of the theories that I'm kind of looking into right now is the possibility that this is remnants of the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. Actually, potentially, this is a pretty common theory that keeps coming up. You know, in a lot of different things. It used to be called, this term used to be called preterism. Terrible name. But it used to be called that, but now it's not really being called that. It's kind of adapted its name into what's called the short season. And it's potential that these structures were built during a time of peace and a time of like unity where humanity was all in one accord and our technology grew and our ideas grew and everything else kind of grew together. And this is the time and the era that we think that maybe some of these structures were built. And it's very unusual that they don't have a bathroom. Maybe that wasn't like a needed thing because maybe there was some supernatural component to our bodies. Maybe if we like ate perfectly pure, it wasn't like we had to go to the bathroom every day. I mean, that's an interesting concept, realistically. Like if we ate non-poisonous food, maybe you don't have to, you know, go to the bathroom all the time. Because like why do they have no bathrooms in a lot of these elaborate structures? It's very, very unusual, fascinating subject to discuss.
Very suspect. Yeah, why wouldn't they need to use the bathroom? Why don't they need to eat? And, you know, talking about the destruction of these buildings that were founded. Every building, they say founded. And if you go on any treasury or any courthouse website, you can see, like, pictures from the late 1700s of these buildings. And what happened to so many of them was a great fire. But remember, these buildings were concrete, marble, brick. They don't burn, right? But fire was the means, they said, that took out so many of them, you know? And then, for sure, you know, it's like, can we just be so prideful and so all-knowing to say, for a fact, that we know exactly where we are in Revelations? I think that we really need to take a closer look because we all believe the pre-trib. We all believe there's no deliverance. We all believe this. It seems as if every mainstream Christianity thing we have partaken of was a lie or part truth. So, I mean, could we be in the little season? Is this what we're looking at, remnants of the little season? Who knows? But, and we also, in this empire with this great technology, we'll put up on the screen, they had money. And the money had the name of Jesus on it. Not only were Jesus' names on these coins, it went from I to J. You know, Jesus.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. And not only that, I uncovered yesterday coins that had the name Jehovah, then Jehovah on it. Even showing flying saucers in the sky on the coins. And I'll have those on screen as well. And my mind was blown. So we had this empire of people with super crazy technology. They had money. God's name was on the money. And obviously, it was a time of peace. There is nothing bad going on around the earth, because if it was, you know, could you imagine what we could do right now if we weren't always in these wars for these people who are trying to make money? You know, it's like, it just blows my mind. And, you know, and then we get into the 1700s and the 1800s. You know, the biggest thing that I've noticed is we see first empty, deserted towns, cities, grand buildings. Then we see suits start showing up. Shortly after the suits show up, we see a bunch of children in dirty muck. Just they've been working, so the children are the workers and the adults are not working. So what's going on with this, Brian?
Yeah, this is a really interesting subject. I mean, like, we're going so broad across the board, guys, right now, and I know if anybody's like trying to track up with us, like, there's so much to this topic. It's such a broad subject. We should probably, you know, what we really need to do is like probably break down each individual theory of this in one potential part, because I mean, you mentioned another thing that I want to bring up, which is very fascinating. When you were talking about the peace, the fact that there was potentially peace. Now, let me ask you a question real quick. Like, if the whole world was in, you know, the whole world records things in history. Do you know what we record the most of? Wars. Okay, we record the most of wars and destruction and takeovers. That's what's recorded in historical accounts more than anything. So it's like, this village was destroyed by this village. You know, if you lived in peace for a whole long time, like, you're not going to record a whole lot. Okay, like, because like, what are you gonna write? Like, Susan went to the store to get her eggs. Like, you're not gonna write. You're not recording things that are standard level amounts of peace. So when the whole world's in peace, there's not going to be a lot of history recorded. Like, because nobody needs to record it. Like, you don't even record those things when it's good times, right? But what's interesting is during the Dark Ages, that we call the Dark Ages, right? It lasted, what, about like 900 years? Again, how long was the millennial reign of Christ supposedly supposed to last for? About 1,000 years or so, supposedly. But, this is the time when some of these structures potentially have been built. When this happened, during this time, they didn't record history. So it makes you wonder, like, is that really the Dark Ages? Or maybe it was the Light Ages and the Ages of Peace, because everybody had come to the understanding of who Christ was, the authority of Christ, the unique ability to be healed and cast out demons, and Satan was bound up, and there was a whole time of authority and peace where humans just walked in the righteousness that we were supposed to walk in. Was that what life was like at that moment? We'll never know, really. I mean, like, we can dig into old books and we can read old stuff, and when you start doing that, you start finding things that are a whole lot more interesting than you suspect.
Yeah, and when you start looking in these old books from the first century, you start finding things that, my goodness, you wish you wouldn't have known. But it gets better. But, obviously that'll be a whole separate episode. But I completely agree. The only thing we have from this time period is there was no, manuscript of historical events. All we have is these grand buildings, this grand technology. We do have pictures which show their airships, which have been blotted out of every single sky. I'll put it up on screen. They tamper the picture, but that right there is big. That's so big.
Yeah.
How are they? So they just all of a sudden got a camera in the late 1700s, 18th century, but they're able to do Photoshop. Because all these pictures, the skies are white out. You can see right here, I put a clip of these trees you can see they're clipped up. So they just figured out how to use a camera to make a camera, and all of a sudden they also have Photoshop at the same time. What technology are we just finding this technology again and reusing it? I saw a thing recently where there were undersea cables. There were undersea cables in the early 1800s. So how much farther does that go back? We didn't even have submarines, I believe, at this time period, if I'm not wrong. So stretching the whole, ground on the floor of the ocean, we have these undersea cables. Were they really for the internet or something similar to the internet? We know that it seems the ether was the energy for this time period, besides their vibrations and everything else. So what all did they have that we don't know about? We know airships were before planes. We know that this crazy building, which is, I would say that these buildings totally outweigh the Pyramid of Giza by far. So it's like, what did they have that we don't know? Because they had Photoshop right when they had the camera. That's mysterious, man. How would they automatically, it seems like there's some devious force at work right now. Like you mentioned, we just kind of lost record of history for a while. They call it the Dark Ages, like some inversion type bullcrap that Satan likes to do. And it's like, we also
maybe they just wiped everything out during that time, and that's why we don't have history, guys.
And it's just like, what don't we know? We also have this Byzantine Empire, which lasts for exactly 1,000 years. We'll put it up on the screen. And in this time period, all the art, all the drawings, when they're talking about and drawing the saints, they're drawing them glorified. They're drawing them with halos, with angels. Were there angels on this earth just 248 years ago is my question. And I'm not going to lie to you. That's what it's looking like. It looks like they were glorified beings on this earth, because how else would we have these buildings we cannot even build today?
Yeah. I love the photos. The old photography, guys, is something everybody should take a time to look it up, because there's old photos in San Francisco where it is completely desolate. And there is no freaking way they emptied the entire cities of San Francisco's streets, houses for huge miles, and there's nothing but one single horse and a buggy on the street. And you're like, what? You're like, did they tell everyone to go inside and somebody forgot their horse and buggy, and there's one horse and buggy, and the whole the whole street. You're like this, or like it's like almost completely empty, and there's like one person in the middle of the streets. And when you look at these old photos of San Francisco and other places like this, where it's like big cities, it is alarmingly suspicious. Like there is something that is not being told to us, and there's something about this information or these photos that is so unreal. Because if they were painting out the images in these photos, like why didn't they paint out the one horse and buggy? Why'd they leave the one horse and buggy in? You know, if they were photoshopping, editing these things, why'd they leave certain stuff in? Why'd they not take out certain things? It's just so peculiar to recognize these old photos, and you see that there's clearly some disconnect with the amount of people that were existing at the time these photos were taken, and something with the technology involved in the environment, because it's just, you know, and at this time, before this time, a lot of these structures, like the San Francisco World's Fair, like look at the buildings, guys. Just you can see that some of the images of the World's Fair in San Francisco. These buildings were built like, again, with horse and buggy. And these buildings are massive structures with intense art and gold and elaborate things and marble. And supposedly they just built it for like a fair event, and then they destroyed it. Yeah, and then there was a fire, but there was actually 5 fires in San Francisco. They don't tell you that. And they like supposedly burned all these buildings, and then they had to destroy them, and then they've covered them up. In fact, there's a building in my own town that was super, super ugly, stupid looking building. It caught fire and burned up, right? And it was just like a very old, like downtown, very old, flat looking building. It burned the face off of the building, but it didn't burn the stones underneath. And when they realized the building burnt up, they recognized all this elaborate designer, beautiful architecture that was like carved stone underneath this boring flat building that caught fire and burned up. They peeled all the outside parts of this old building down, and now they left it as the building as it was, out of stone, and it's like one of the nicest looking buildings in my town. And it's a phenomenal looking, crazy structure that was like just like built, like covered up. It was whitewashed. This is where you get the term whitewashed, you know, where it was just literally covered up and blotted out for like to make it look ugly and boring and useless. So that's happening everywhere.
Yeah, the whitewashing is huge. People think it has to do with race. Not at all. I've went through all these construction pictures of these founded buildings. They're never constructing. Every time, every picture. I've never seen one picture of an active building. What they do is they have scaffolds around it, and they literally take pictures of them painting the buildings. They repaint the buildings that were already there. And the expedition was wild because they created the, oh my goodness, Nikola Tesla had the contract to bring electricity to the one. They make these grand like cities, and it's like totally futuristic, and all of a sudden they just made it for like a few months and tore it down. Like, that is the stupidest thing I can even conceive. And the fact that we're not even taught that. I was never taught about the Great Fairs, the expeditions when I was in school. Never.
No.
I didn't even hear about it until a few years ago, you know. But whenever I saw Tartaria, I just knew something wasn't right. And there is this great force of I really believe personally, and I'll get your take, but I believe it has to do with the bottomless pit. So the bottomless pit in Revelations, the Abyssos, Revelation 9:11, where we have Apollyon, Apollo, Abaddon, Helios being over the pit, the Statue of Liberty, right? Well, that pit existed before CERN was on top of it. So what was it doing before? The locust also came from that pit. If that was Revelations back then, right? If that was Revelation. So that pit has been active. And now in our time period that we're living in, this 21st century, it's kind of like everything's technological. We have black mirrors in our hand, and everything is, you know, I have an old pharma book from the 1970s on my shelf I got with a bunch of encyclopedias. And I look in that book, and I see on probably the middle of the book, I see that wires are dangerous to our health. The wires themselves causes EMF. You know what I mean? And it's just so, like, all this technological stuff is going on. AI infused with quantum mechanics, making these super soldiers that know all things through, this quantum expansion. So what I wonder is, the bottomless pit, is it possible the bottomless pit before CERN was on top of it, if it was still acting as like this great whirlpool of magic and deception to flood the world and change things. Because one thing we know is so much stuff in history has changed. We can prove without a doubt at least that 300 years have been faked. You can even see mentions where the Pope changed, what, a couple years, 100 years, because he wanted his reign to be 1,000, whatever. So, you know, the way they're changing history is on a massive scale because, well, again, we go back to the Orphan Trains, which I'll let you talk about that, but they came and they were indoctrinated before. But what's your take on the Abyssos in Tartaria and then to the Cabbage Patch Kids?
Yeah, so when it comes to like I'll say Tartaria first. Let me explain something about Tartaria. So there's a few different names for this time period or this empire that existed, and it was Tartary, Tartaria, Tartarus. Okay, Tartarus is the name that we give to the place of hell. Okay, it's called Tartarus. It's like hell, and there is a lot of drawings on maps for this Tartary type empire. Okay, and it's drawn in multiple different places, in multiple different spots on the maps. And the theory is that when people came to new lands, because there's a part even in America that's all considered Tartary actually, and there's parts where when people came to new lands, they would mark something off as Tartarus or Tartary or Tartaria, and that name meant we don't go in this area because there be giants. You heard the phrase "there be giants there," the land there be giants there, right? So that phrase came from people that went into Tartaria. They would get killed and eaten by the creatures and the things, the Nephilim, that lived there.
Wow.
And that's why a lot of places that you see this Tartary drawn on multiple maps. Eventually, the Tartary areas became extinct of the Nephilim hybrids and the monsters and the creatures, and humans gradually moved into the forests and took over the areas. But there was at one point a nation that called itself, I think that it was the Tartarian Empire, right? And so what they did is they just said, hey, we are Tartaria. So they moved into the forest before the rest of humanity moved in there and basically fought and wiped out most of the monsters and the creatures that lived there and learned to live amongst the environment of dangerousness. And that's, I believe, the Great Wall of Tartary, which is what the Great Wall of China is, I believe. And so they basically took over that region and said, hey, we are Tartary, and we're going to call ourselves the Tartarian Empire. All you humans are afraid to come into Tartarus because you think it's hell. Well, we'll make this our kingdom. And so they made an area of that part their kingdom. And there's other parts where this kind of similar thing sort of happened, it seems, where basically humanity moved into the dangerous zone and said, yeah, we're Tartaria. And so that's kind of what it seems like Tartaria might have been. It might have been just a danger zone that Nephilim and other beasts lived in at one point, and humans just moved into it and then created their own kingdom because other people were afraid to go there. And so that's some of the instances of Tartary. But there are other recorded sort of instances of Tartary that seem to be a little bit interesting and a little bit different. There is the Tartary flag. I believe does it have a dragon on the Tartaria flag, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So, yeah, and see, that dragon there represents, the seed of Satan. It was the area, the land of the serpent. It was the land of the seed of Satan. And so there was Nephilim there were giants there, and there were monsters in that area where they took over. And so then they're like, yeah, we're the kingdom of this area, of this region, and we've taken over. And so this Tartaria thing has like spread, and eventually that empire wasn't so strong that it could withstand the encroaching humanity that realized, hey, there's no monsters anymore. You guys, they don't exist anymore. They've all gone extinct. And they kind of moved into these areas. And so that's what I think a lot of Tartary is. But I think it's more interesting to look at. Again, there's so many different things about this topic when you start digging into it, but that's the stuff that I have found that seems to be pretty consistent with a lot of the understanding of what Tartary is, and so it matches with that name. And then there was something else you were saying about the children, the children that spontaneously just happen to come out of nowhere. Okay, guys. This is a very interesting thing. This is where you get the story of Cabbage Patch Kids, if you guys don't know, but Cabbage Patch Kids, there was this story that these children just started showing up out of nowhere. Children started coming out of the forest, and they believed they were growing out of cabbage fields and and fields where all these kids just showed up, and then they put them on trains and had to do something with them. And so there's this time called the Orphan Trains, and you can look up Orphan Trains, where they ship these children all over the world and try to like give them to families and people to try to, you know, repopulate the earth. I don't know. But it is a very interesting topic, and is a very, very interesting subject, because all these kids showed up out of nowhere. And there was, during the World's Fairs, they had baby incubation fairs. Guys, look up the baby incubators as well. You can put a picture of some of that. This happened all over the place. Like, there was baby incubators at a lot of fairs started this way. You go to the fair and you'd pick up a child, just a random child from a baby incubator. Like, where are these kids coming from? Supposedly they were like giving up their children. Okay, and there was insane asylums, and you're like, well, what are these insane asylums for? Where were all these crazy people? Like, why are they? And they don't even exist anymore in operation like they were. But like this kind of thing was all connected in so many different ways that it's not, what they're telling us about this history does not make sense. They are lying about something. When you start putting the pieces together, the insane asylums, the orphanages, the children the orphan trains, the children that show up out of nowhere. Dude, back in the day, if you had a child, giving up your child was never an option. It was never a good thing. If you had a child back then, that's another hand to help on the farm. It's not another mouth to feed. It wasn't like so difficult to feed another child's mouth, okay? It was like literally you could feed yourself. You could just like save some of the wheat that you're growing to feed your kid. It was not it wasn't a detriment to have a child ever. It's only in today's society where it was a detriment to have a child. Back then, like, if you had a kid, that was your survival. So, like, people giving up their children does not make sense whatsoever. And so, like, that was how society treated children. That was the environment that kids were supposedly being surrendered into. This does not make sense. Something they're telling us is a lie, and it does not quite line up with the way things are going. Anyways, sorry I talked too long.
No. And yeah, children were literal wealth. Besides any generation of our own. Look in the Bible, look at Job. You know, we saw his wealth not from his just possessions, but his children. When God was doing a miracle for people, what did he do? He gave them children. You know, Elizabeth. He gave them, you know, John. So it was always it was a miracle, and it was wealth, and it was God said to Abraham, I'll make your offspring the sand of the sea, right? So it's like, you know, like children, yes, and they did not, you know, it just blows my mind, man, because we had these children being trained around, then we had these children, and the incubator babies. We had children that were being sold on postcards. We'll put some of that up right now, and these aren't fake postcards. Look them up yourself. These are literal postcards for people selling children. And we're like, where are the children coming from? Well, the insane asylums. What were they for? The religious fanatics. Who are the religious fanatics? Probably some people who lived in a certain time period where amazing things were going on and they remembered things from it. Thank you guys for watching this show. Make sure you guys follow Bryan. Here are his socials. Make sure you subscribe to his YouTube, his TikTok, his Facebook, his Instagram, and the same with mine. And make sure you hit the little bell so you can get notified. We have 2 episodes a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. See you guys later.
Awesome. Bye. Let's go.
All right. 1 second.
Got it.
What's up, guys? See, I'm tired, man. I get all laughing. All right. What's up, guys? Welcome to Conspiracy and the Cross. I'm Moon, your co-host.